used to be. Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Wolfe. I am a returned Peace Corps volunteer. I used to work with Peace Corps in Kyrgyzstan, and I am still living in Kyrgyzstan. I have been living here for 5 years, and yeah, that's a little bit about me. Today, I am going to be sharing with you some recipes that are popular in the United States during the autumn season. You may have seen some of these recipes here in Kyrgyzstan. You may have tried them, especially if you are in Bishkek. But today I will be sharing with you how to make two recipes. Okay, and so during this time, if you have questions, you can feel free to ask them, but I will probably be answering them after I share the recipes with you. So, without further ado, let's take a look at some recipes that you can prepare during the autumn season. The first recipe we're going to look at is apple cider. This is a favorite of mine. It is a drink, and it's fairly easy to make. You don't need a lot of items for it, and many of the items, especially during the autumn season, are cheap. They're not expensive. The only thing about apple cider is it takes a long time to make. It can take several hours, but during most of those hours, you're not actually doing much work. So let's take a look at what kind of supplies you'll need to make apple cider and the ingredients that you need. So you will need a couple of things. You will need 2 pots. You will want one large pot, a big pot, and you will want a smaller pot. Okay? You'll see the smaller pot later, but the big pot is very important. I have a couple of kazans here. And for size, so the one that I use is about 8 liters. It holds 8 liters in it. You can have less, you can have more if you want, but I was able to use an 8-liter pot to make apple cider, and my smaller pot was about 4.5 to 5 liters. And so these pots were the right size for me when I was making apple cider. You will also want a mesh strainer, something like this, to use. That will come in handy later. You will want a ladle. And this is optional, but I recommend it, and that's the cheesecloth. That's that white cloth here, not the liquid inside, but the cheesecloth, the cloth, will be very nice to use. There's a reason for that, which I will explain later. You do not need it, but I recommend it personally. I like to use the cheesecloth. All right, so these are supplies that you will need. You will also need some ingredients, and here's what you will need to make apple cider. You need apples, 10 of them. For this recipe, you'll want 10 apples. You need an orange, but only half of an orange, only half. You need 4 cinnamon sticks, and then you need spices. These are very important because this is what gives apple cider a very nice spice flavor to it, which makes it so popular. You want cloves. These are cloves, and you want ground cloves. You want them like this, ground cloves, a nice fine powder. And you need 1 teaspoon of cloves. A teaspoon is a little spoon that you usually use for your tea when you put sugar in it. In the United States, we have different measurements. We don't usually say grams or milliliters. We use teaspoons and tablespoons and cups, but a teaspoon is the little spoon that you usually use with your tea. So you want 1 teaspoon of ground cloves. You also want nutmeg. So nutmeg is a popular spice as well and very necessary for apple cider. And what you want is you don't want the powder of the nutmeg. You actually want 1 full nutmeg, 1 full one like this. So you'll want to take 1 of those for this recipe. Now, you will also need these 2 things, and these are more difficult to find in Kyrgyzstan. That's allspice and brown sugar. You can find brown sugar, but it's a little difficult to find outside of Bishkek. And even in Bishkek, it's fairly challenging to find. Allspice, I have never found in Bishkek, but I'm going to give you some tips on how you can make allspice and brown sugar at home, or how you can substitute it with different spices and different materials that you can do anywhere in Kyrgyzstan. So you want 1 teaspoon of allspice, or our substitute, and half a cup of brown sugar. And when I say a cup, half a cup, something like this size. This is what I find to be 1 cup. And so you want to fill it halfway, half a cup of brown sugar. But let's talk about how we can make allspice and brown sugar with easy ingredients found all over Kyrgyzstan. Okay. If you want to make allspice, now allspice looks like this. It looks like black pepper, but it's not black pepper. It's very different from black pepper. So do not use black pepper to make allspice. Allspice is its own kind of spice, but you can get the flavor of allspice by mixing 3 things together. You can mix ground cinnamon, ground nutmeg, which I showed you earlier, and ground cloves, which we're already using in our recipe. So you want these 3 things. And remember, we need 1 teaspoon of allspice. So you will want 1/3 teaspoon of ground cinnamon, 1/3 teaspoon of ground nutmeg, and 1/3 teaspoon of ground cloves. Mix these together, and you basically have the same flavor as allspice. And you can find all of these things in Kyrgyzstan. Now, that's how we can make allspice. Brown sugar is very easily made by mixing 2 things. You can take regular sugar, regular white sugar, half a cup, and honey. Of course, there's lots of honey in Kyrgyzstan. It's something that most of us have at home. You can just take 1 tablespoon of honey and mix it into the sugar, and then you basically have brown sugar. And when I say a tablespoon, I don't mean the little spoon. I mean the big spoon that you have for soup. Okay, so for a tablespoon, you want 1 big soup spoon, 1 tablespoon of honey, and you want to mix that into your sugar, and you will get brown sugar. So once you've done that, now you have all of your ingredients. You've made your allspice, you've made your brown sugar, and you should have everything necessary to make apple cider. So let's talk about the steps that you need to do to make apple cider. First thing you need to do is you need to take your apples and you need to quarter them, just like this. Cut it in half once, cut it in half twice, and you have 4 pieces of apple. And you need to do that to all 10 apples. Cut them into quarters. After you have quartered your apples, you also want to cut out the seeds. I recommend cutting out the seeds because they're not necessary, and you can use the leftover apples later for something else. But if you take out the seeds, you're making that easier. Then here's the cheesecloth. Now remember, I said this was optional. You don't need to use a cheesecloth, but I like to because I put my spices in there. I put the cloves in there. I put the nutmeg in there. I put what else did I put in there? The allspice mixture. So you put these spices into the cheesecloth and you tie it shut with a string to keep them all inside. Okay, now you might get some of the spices coming out of the cheesecloth, but that's okay. I use a cheesecloth because I don't want the spices floating around in my apple cider, because when I finish it and I want to drink it, I don't want to feel the spices running against my teeth. I don't like that feeling. And so I prefer to use a cheesecloth. Now, you don't need a cheesecloth. Actually, you can use any kind of cloth. You can put your spices into the cloth and tie them together, just like you see here, and it will still work. So the purpose of the cheesecloth is to put the spices inside to get the flavor of the spices into the liquid, into the apple cider, without getting the spices floating around inside and in your final drink. So I use a cheesecloth to hold my spices. but I do not put the cinnamon sticks in. I let the cinnamon sticks float in the water, which you will see in a picture later. So first, we quarter the apples. We put the spices in a cheesecloth, wrap it up, and tie it. And then we put it all together in a pot. You can put in your apple quarters, the orange, the cinnamon sticks, which you see floating around in here. That's what I like to do. Your spices in a cheesecloth, if you use a cheesecloth. Otherwise, you have spices floating around like you see here. And the brown sugar. We put that in the pot, and then we cover all of this with water. And what you want to do is you want to fill the pot with enough water to cover everything by 5 centimeters. Now, of course, as you see here, apples, oranges, spices, they all float. So as you fill up the pot, you want to push down the apples and see how much space there is. Test to see if you've got about 5 centimeters of space between the apples and the top of the water. Once you have that, then you know you have enough water. So you do want to cover it with plenty of water to make sure that you have enough liquid for your apple cider. If you don't fill enough water in the pot, you won't get very much apple cider. So fill up your pot, try to cover all of the ingredients with 5 centimeters of water. Now that we have everything in the pot, we want to boil it. So get that water boiling with a high heat, get it moving, get it really, really hot. And once you have that boil, you want to turn the temperature down to a simmer. And when I say a simmer, that means it's not crazy bubbles going up really, really fast. Now we have little bubbles and they're just making, little movements, floating up quickly, but not very fast and violently like we have for a boil. So after you boil your water with a high heat, turn the temperature down and let it simmer like we see here. And then cover your pot. Cover it to trap the air inside, and you're going to wait for 2 hours. You're going to let it sit on a low heat for 2 hours. And so you can go do something else. You can go watch a show, read a book, go for a walk. Maybe not go for a walk because you've got the stove on and you should probably be watching it. But you have 2 hours to wait as you're making your apple cider. So 2 hours has passed. Now what? Now you want to open up your pot. Everything's really hot. The apples are really soft now. So you want to do a couple of things. Take out the orange and take out your cheesecloth of spices. And what you're going to do is you're going to mash the apples inside. You want to get them mashed and soft now like you see here. Okay, before they're whole apples or the quarters of apples. Now you want to mash them to really get the flavor out into the water to make your cider. After you mash the apples, put the spices back in. You can leave the orange out, but put the spices back in. And now you're going to let the cider simmer again. So not boil, just soft bubbles. Soft bubbles for 1 more hour. And this time, no top. Keep the pot uncovered. Let the steam come out. But let it simmer for 1 more hour uncovered. So a 3rd hour on the stove. So apple cider can take a long time, but fortunately, it's not too much work while it is cooking, much like a soup. After 1 hour has passed, now here's when you need the rest of your supplies. You want your small pot now, okay? Because you're going to start taking out everything and getting your apple cider out of the pot. You've got apple mash, mashed apples, apple puree floating around in your apple cider. You need to take that out so that you can have the liquid, have the drink. And so what you're going to do is you're going to take your ladle and you're going to ladle out the apples, the cider, and you're going to pour that into the mesh strainer over the pot. That way, in here, you're catching the apples, okay? You're catching the apple mash, but the liquid is coming out into the pot. And so the pot is holding your apple cider. And here, you have the apples that you don't need anymore. You can use it for something else like compost or making applesauce, some other recipe. And after the water is going through, it's getting full of apples, you actually want to be pressing with the ladle. Press it and smooth it out. Make sure you're getting all of the liquid out of the apples. Okay, they still hold a lot of cider inside of them, and if you press it, you're getting it out, getting all the liquid, all the cider. And then you can scoop out the apple mash, put it somewhere else, get out more cider, pour it through, mash it, scoop it out, etc. And so you're getting your apple cider into the small pot. And so afterwards, once you've gone through the entire big pot, you've taken all the apples out, all of the liquid out, your small pot is filled with apple cider. And now you can enjoy homemade apple cider, which can look just like this, kind of a brownish color. Put in a cinnamon stick. It's really great when it's hot, and I find to be very, very excellent in the autumn season when it's starting to get cool outside. You can enjoy a warm cup of apple cider, like a very nice cup of warm apple tea, you might think of it as. And so with the recipe that I've given you, you can make about 3 to 4 liters of apple cider, which is quite a lot, and you can keep it in your refrigerator for 2 weeks. Okay, and after 2 weeks, you definitely want to finish it. I will probably finish my apple cider, about 4 liters of it, within 1 week, because I really like apple cider in the autumn. And every time you want apple cider, you can drink it cold. It's perfectly fine that way, but it's very good hot. Take it out of your refrigerator, heat it up on the stove, and give yourself a nice hot cup of apple cider. So we've looked at one recipe where we are making a drink, apple cider. Now let's talk about some food that you can make. You can make pumpkin pie. And this is very easy to make in the autumn because pumpkins are now available. Pumpkins are growing, and you can use them to make lots of different things. And I love pumpkin pie. Pumpkin pie is very popular in the United States. It's a little bit difficult to make. It's a lot of work to make, but it's delicious. I find it to be amazing, and it tastes great with apple cider. So let's take a look at how to make pumpkin pie, what supplies you need, and what ingredients you will need. So apple cider was fairly easy. It took a long time, but you don't need a lot of supplies. You don't need a lot of ingredients, but pumpkin pie needs a lot more. The supplies, you don't need too much. You need a pie plate, first of all, something like this. You'll want a big bowl, and then you will want one of these two things. You don't need both. You will want a masher or an immersion blender. I like the immersion blender because it gets the pumpkin very, very smooth. But if you don't have one, which is perfectly normal, you can use a masher, which most of us have in our kitchens, to get the pumpkin nice and smooth. So these are supplies that you will need to make pumpkin pie. For ingredients, we have a lot. All right, so here's what you will need. You will want a pumpkin, but not the whole pumpkin. You only need 425 grams of pumpkin, so not your whole pumpkin. So you need this, 425 grams. You will need 3 eggs, brown sugar, half a cup of brown sugar. And so we can use our same recipe for brown sugar as apple cider, half a cup of white sugar, 1 tablespoon of honey. You also want 1/3 of a cup of white sugar, half a teaspoon of salt, and then lots of spices. You want some ground cloves. Not a lot of cloves this time. And again, we want the powder, just 1/4 of a teaspoon, a really tiny amount in our little spoon. You also want some nutmeg. Now this time we don't want the full nutmeg, not for pumpkin pie. We actually want the ground nutmeg. We want the powder. And also you need 1/4 of a teaspoon of ground nutmeg. Then cinnamon, very important. Instead of cinnamon sticks this time, we want ground cinnamon, and we want 2 teaspoons of ground cinnamon. Lots of cinnamon really gives the flavor to the pumpkin, makes it nice and sweet. and then 1 teaspoon of ground ginger, not fresh ginger. The others are optional. You can have cardamom, which you don't need to have it. It's optional, but it does give a little bit of extra flavor, but you really don't need it because you don't need a lot. You only need 1/8 of a teaspoon. That's very, very, very little. So it's optional. You don't need to have it, but it does add some extra flavor. It's also a little harder to find. What is also good is lemon zest. Lemon zest is when you're shaving the lemon peel and you get a nice little powder like this, and it gives a nice citrus flavor, good lemon flavor. And so if you have half a teaspoon of lemon zest, that is also very good, but also it's optional. You don't need to have it. What you do need to have is 1.5 cups of heavy cream. Now, heavy cream in Kyrgyzstan can sometimes be a little bit difficult to find. It can also be a little bit expensive, but what you can do is substitute it with something very common. Kaymak. Very common in Kyrgyzstan. Take some kaymak, not smetana. You want kaymak because it has more of a buttery flavor. And if you take kaymak, which is fairly thick, get 1 cup of kaymak, half a cup of milk, mix them together, and you'll basically have heavy cream. So you want to take the kaymak. It's a little thick, a little too much like butter. Add some milk, get it a little bit more liquidy, kind of like we see here, and you basically have heavy cream. And we want 1.5 cups of heavy cream. So 1 cup kaymak, half a cup milk mixed together will make heavy cream. And that's the ingredients that you need for pumpkin pie, but only for the middle part of pumpkin pie. What about the dough? What about the crust part? Well, here you're going to need a few ingredients. You're going to need flour, 2.5 cups of flour. And then you need a lot of butter, 240 grams of butter. Yeah, it's a lot, but the crust is amazing. In my opinion, it's the best part of pumpkin pie because the crust is so buttery. So you want 240 grams of butter, and it needs to be cold and it needs to be cut into cubes. And I'll show you a picture of that a little bit later so that you can see. You also need 1 teaspoon of salt and half a cup of very cold water. Ice water would be best. So let's start by making our crust and go through these ingredients on how to make the dough. First, you need your big bowl. You want to put in your flour, you want to put in your salt, and mix them together in the bowl. Easy. Now the hard part. Now you need to put in 240 grams of butter, and it's cold butter, so it's a lot of work to get into the flour. And here you see that the butter has been cubed. It's been cut into smaller pieces, it's cold, and it's been put into the bowl. And you can take 2 forks and press them together into the dough until it looks like this. And this is a lot of work, to be honest, because the butter is cold and hard. It's difficult to get it into the flour. It's not going to be smooth. It's going to be chunky like this, but you want little pieces of butter where the flour and salt are stuck to little pieces of butter. And you can do that by mashing it with 2 forks. So we call this cutting the butter, and you cut the butter into the flour until it looks like this. Once you have this, now we need to start putting in the water. And it does need to be cold. Don't make hot water because when you're making pie crust, you need it to stay cold until you put it in the oven. And so you put in a little bit of cold water at a time, like 1 spoonful. Take a big spoon out some water, put it in the flour and butter mixture, and again, press it in with a fork or with your hands if you want to, until you have something like this. Now your dough starts to look like this after you've put in half a cup of water. And now we need to roll the dough flat. You need to put flour on a table, on a surface, and roll the dough until it's flat. It should not be sticky. If it's sticky, there's too much water, and you should probably add in some more flour. And you want to roll the dough until the flour that you put on the table is completely in the dough. Once the flour is in the dough, you want to roll the dough into a ball and cut it in half, just like this, because this recipe will make 2 pumpkin pies. Awesome. I hope you like pumpkin pie. I sure do. 2 pies sounds fantastic. I'll be eating it for weeks. Once you've cut it in half, you want to make your dough into 2 flat discs like this. And we want to cover it with plastic wrap or put it in a plastic bag, 2 separate plastic bags or 2 separate wrappings of plastic wrap, because we have two pieces of dough now. And so you wrap it up and put it in the fridge for 2 hours. Remember, the dough needs to stay cold, and that's very important. And so while your dough is sitting in the refrigerator, wrapped in plastic and getting cold for 2 hours, what can you do? Well, you can start working with the pumpkin part. Start making the middle of your pumpkin pie. So very first thing you need to do in that 2-hour period is you need to cut your pumpkin, peel off the skin, get rid of the strings and the seeds. You do not want the stringy pieces of pumpkin. You do not want the seeds. You do not want the skin. Just the meat part of the pumpkin, like this. 425 grams of pumpkin. You're going to boil it in water. Boil it until it's soft, like you're making puree, like you're making mashed potatoes. When the pumpkin gets very soft, then you're ready to mash it or blend it. So you can mash it with the masher. Once it's done, of course, pour the water out before you mash it. So boil it, get it soft, dump the water out, and you have soft pumpkin. Mash it or blend it. Blending it makes it very smooth, but the masher will do a good job too. Mash it until it's nice and soft. And now we need to work with our spices. Okay. You have 3 eggs. You want to beat them together with a fork. Stir them together until they look like this in a large bowl. Then you're going to put in all of your spices, your salts, your sugars. You're going to put all of this in with the egg, and you're going to mix the egg and the sugar and spices together. And then you're going to add your pumpkin. So you have your pureed pumpkin. And you add that to the mixture, and you're stirring it into the eggs, into the spices, into the sugars, and it starts to look something like this. Now you want your heavy cream or your kaimak milk blend. Start pouring that in and mix that into the pureed pumpkin that you have. And now you want to take out your dough. All right. You put the dough into the pie plate and you make it fit perfectly. Spread it around. You really need to move your fingers here to get it into the corners, to push it up against the walls, and get every part of the pie plate covered with this crust. And look just like this. And you want to work fast because remember, the dough needs to stay cold. Okay, so while you're working with it, the dough is cold and it needs to stay cold. Once you have your pie crust ready like this, you can pour in the pumpkin filling that you have been making. So you've got your cream and pumpkin and spices and eggs all mixed together, and it looks like this. You've poured it in, and it's ready to be baked in the oven. Don't eat it yet. This is very soft. So put it in the oven. You want your oven to be 220 degrees Celsius, and you want to cook it for 15 minutes. You can cook it in an oven like this. You can cook it in an oven like this, but watch it very carefully because ovens are different. It may take more time. It may take less time, but start off 220 degrees for 15 minutes. After 15 minutes have passed, you want to turn the temperature down. Turn it to 175 degrees Celsius. And you want to bake it for 50 minutes more. Now, you might need to bake it for a longer time. Okay, but we're now cooking it at a lower temperature. Once you have cooked it for about 50 minutes, you want to start taking it out and checking if it's ready. And so you check the pie The easiest way is by taking a knife and sticking it into the middle of the pie. You want to see if the middle has been cooked all the way. So you stick the knife in, and if it comes out clean like this, then it's ready. There's no pumpkin on this knife. So they stuck it in, they took it out, no pumpkin on the knife, which means it's completely baked in the middle. That's what you want. If there's pumpkin, like a lot of pumpkin sticking to the knife, it's not ready yet, and you want to keep baking it. So you want to bake for 5 more minutes, maybe longer, maybe 10. And after some more time has passed, 5-10 minutes, take it out again, check it with a knife in a different part. If it comes out clean, it's ready. If there's still pumpkin on it, well, you guessed, put it back in the oven, wait a little bit longer. It just depends on the oven. So you do want to check to make sure that it is cooked all the way through. But once it is completely cooked, completely baked, now you want to let it cool. Don't eat it immediately. It's too hot. You're going to burn yourself. The pie is still settling. So you want to let the pie get cool for 2 hours. Let it sit on the counter. Let it sit by the window. Let it sit outside. But give it 2 hours to cool down. After 2 hours, you're ready to enjoy your pumpkin pie. It's ready to eat, and you can enjoy it with some of the apple cider that you have already made. And so here are 2 recipes that you can make during the autumn period. You can make apple cider with easy to find ingredients, and you can, if you really want to work, if you really want to try something new, you can try to make pumpkin pie. It's a bit more challenging. It may not turn out right the first time, but that's half the fun. Even if it doesn't turn out perfectly, it's a fun thing to try to make. So I hope that you do try to make these recipes and can enjoy them during the autumn season. At this time, I'm going to take any questions if you have any, if there are any. But if there are none, then I think it's looking like there are no questions, actually. Then, we have someone saying that cardamom is hard to find and expensive. Okay, 67 soms per gram, per 10 grams. So as I was saying before, it is optional. If you do not want to use cardamom for your pumpkin pie, you do not need to, because you only need 1/8 of a teaspoon. So it is optional. Don't worry about cardamom. You can use that for something else, but it doesn't add a lot. Oh, I see someone that I know. Hello, Jildis. Nice to see you. Glad you were watching. Thanks for watching. I hope that you make some of these fantastic dishes at home. Hello, everyone. Any other questions? Are you cooking often? Yes, well, when I can. I do have to work, so I only cook when I have time or when I really just want to, but I do love to cook. It's one of my favorite hobbies. I like to cook all kinds of things. One of my other favorites is bagels. Yeah, lots of cooking. All right, any other questions at this time? All right. If not, then I would like to thank you for watching and joining me today. I hope that you have a fantastic autumn, and I hope to see you in the future when I give another presentation. So thank you for watching and have a fantastic day. Bye, everyone.